If you're ever alone in an office building after midnight and you hear a machine start working by itself, do not assume it is a glitch, because that was the first mistake John Miller made on a cold October night in Chicago. John was a 32-year-old IT engineer who had been working the night shift at Blackwood Tower for nearly 6 months, a job most employees avoided because the building was old, quiet, and carried an uncomfortable reputation no one liked to discuss openly. Blackwood Tower stood in the financial district like a forgotten relic, a tall concrete structure built in the late 1970s, with narrow hallways, low ceilings, and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly even when no one was around. During the day, the office felt normal enough. Crowded desks, ringing phones, managers pacing back and forth. But at night, when the last employees left and the elevator stopped running frequently, the building felt hollow, as if it were holding its breath. John didn't believe in ghost stories or urban legends. He believed in logic, deadlines, and caffeine, which was why he sat alone at his desk at exactly 2:17 a.m., staring at lines of code on his monitor while the rest of the city slept. Outside the tinted windows, Chicago's skyline glowed faintly, but inside the office floor, only a handful of lights remained on, casting long, distorted shadows across empty cubicles. The silence was so complete that John could hear the ticking of the wall clock near the emergency exit, each second stretching longer than the last. He rubbed his tired eyes, took a sip of cold coffee, and leaned back in his chair, unaware that this precise moment, 2:17 a.m., was when everything always began. Without warning, the printer behind him came to life, its mechanical whirring slicing through the silence like a blade. John flinched and spun around in his chair, his heart jumping despite himself, and stared at the printer as it slowly pulled paper from its tray, page after page sliding out as if someone had just sent a massive print job. Seriously, he muttered under his breath, annoyed more than afraid, assuming a system error or a delayed command from earlier in the day. He stood up and walked toward the printer, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the carpeted floor, and as he reached it, he noticed something strange. The papers were blank, completely empty, yet the printer continued working as if it had something urgent to say. John frowned, pressed the cancel button, and watched as the machine slowly powered down, leaving behind an unsettling quiet that felt heavier than before. He glanced around the floor, expecting to see another employee playing a prank or working late like him. But every desk was empty, every chair pushed in neatly, every monitor dark. A chill crawled up his spine, though he quickly dismissed it, reminding himself that old buildings made noises, electronics malfunctioned, and exhaustion played tricks on the mind. Still, as he walked back to his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that the office felt different now, as if something had shifted the moment the printer started. Sitting down, he tried to refocus on his work, but the silence no longer felt neutral. It felt watchful. The hum of the air conditioning sounded uneven. The lights above him flickered once, then stabilized, and somewhere far down the hallway, he thought he heard movement, just a soft shuffle, like shoes brushing against carpet. John froze, listening carefully, holding his breath, but the sound didn't repeat. He let out a nervous laugh, blaming stress, yet his eyes kept drifting toward the long hallway leading to the conference rooms, where darkness pooled thicker than the rest of the floor. He checked the time again, 2:19 a.m., and felt a strange sense of pressure, like he was running out of time without knowing why. His email notification chimed suddenly, making him jump again, and when he looked at his screen, the inbox was empty, the notification gone as if it had never existed. That was when John realized something that made his stomach tighten. The printer wasn't connected to the network anymore. He remembered unplugging it earlier that night during maintenance, which meant it should have been impossible for it to turn on at all. Slowly, deliberately, John stood up once more and scanned the office floor, noticing details he hadn't paid attention to before. The emergency exit sign at the end of the hallway flickering faintly, the reflection of his own movement in the glass walls of the conference room, the way the air felt colder the farther he stepped from his desk. He told himself he was just tired, that he needed fresh air, maybe a short break, and began walking toward the conference area to make sure everything was secure, unaware that this decision would bring him closer to something that had been waiting patiently inside Blackwood Tower for years, something that only revealed itself when the clock struck 2:17, and something that had finally noticed he was alone. John moved cautiously toward the conference room hallway, every step feeling heavier than the last. as if the air itself resisted his movement, and with each step, the temperature dropped just enough for him to notice the goosebumps forming on his arms beneath his rolled-up sleeves. The carpet here was darker, older, and his footsteps sounded muffled, almost absorbed by the floor, which made the silence feel even more unnatural. As he passed the first glass-walled conference room, he caught his reflection staring back at him, pale and tense, but for just a fraction of a second, he thought the reflection lagged behind his movement, as if it had blinked a moment too late. He stopped abruptly and turned toward the glass, his heart pounding, but everything looked normal again, just his own tired face and the empty room behind it, with chairs neatly arranged around a long table. Shaking his head, John whispered to himself that he was exhausted, that the human brain looked for patterns when deprived of sleep, yet the uneasy feeling in his chest refused to fade. As he continued down the hallway, a faint sound reached his ears, subtle at first, almost indistinguishable from the hum of the building. But slowly it became clearer, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers pressing against a keyboard. John's stomach tightened as he followed the sound to the largest conference room at the end of the hall, where the door stood slightly open, allowing a thin strip of light to spill into the darkness. He paused at the threshold, his hand hovering near the door handle, listening closely as the tapping grew louder, faster, more deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was inside was typing with purpose. Gathering what little courage he had left, John pushed the door open, and the sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. The conference room was empty, yet the computer at the far end of the table was on, its screen glowing an unnatural shade of blue in the dim light, and the keyboard in front of it was moving, keys pressing down one by one without any visible hands. The tapping stopped abruptly the moment John stepped inside, replaced by a low, electric hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Slowly, letters began appearing on the screen, forming a message line by line, and John felt frozen in place as he read the words. "You are late." His heart hammered violently in his chest, and before he could process what that meant, another line appeared beneath it. "You were supposed to be here at 2:17. The room grew colder, his breath visible in the air now, and the lights above flickered violently, casting sharp, strobing shadows that made the empty chairs appear to twitch and move. John took a step back, his heel bumping into the table behind him, the sound echoing too loudly, and that was when the message on the screen changed again, the letters typing themselves with increasing speed. "John, turn around." Panic surged through him, his instincts screaming at him to run. Yet his body refused to obey, rooted to the spot by a fear deeper than anything he'd ever felt before. The glass walls of the conference room suddenly darkened, as if something outside was blocking the light, and within the reflection, John saw it, a tall, distorted shape standing just behind him, its outlines stretching unnaturally, its head tilted at an impossible angle. He didn't turn around, not fully, but even without looking directly, he could feel it there, close enough that the air around him felt thick and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The temperature plummeted further. The lights burst one by one with sharp pops, and the room was plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the eerie glow of the computer screen. The shadow in the reflection moved closer, its edges rippling like smoke trapped in human form, and John finally broke free from his paralysis, stumbling toward the door with a choked gasp. He burst out of the conference room and ran down the hallway, his footsteps frantic and uneven, the sound of something following him just out of sight, moving faster than he could comprehend. As he reached the main office floor, the lights flickered on and off in rapid succession, plunging the space into alternating moments of blinding brightness and pitch-black darkness. In those brief flashes, John glimpsed figures standing between the cubicles, motionless silhouettes that vanished whenever the light stabilized. His lungs burned as he sprinted toward the elevators, his mind racing, trying desperately to make sense of what was happening, clinging to the hope that once he left the floor, once he escaped the building, everything would return to normal. He slammed the elevator call button repeatedly, his finger trembling, but the digital display above the doors remained dark, unresponsive. The tapping sound returned, louder now, echoing throughout the floor, no longer confined to the conference room, but coming from everywhere at once, like hundreds of keyboards being typed on simultaneously by unseen hands. The air felt suffocating, pressing in from all sides, and John realized with a sickening certainty that the building itself was aware of him, that Blackwood Tower was not just a place, but an entity that observed, remembered, and waited. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the office in a dull red glow, and the elevator doors finally began to open with a slow, agonizing creak, as if reluctant to let him in. As John stumbled inside, gasping for breath, he felt a presence brush past him, icy and intangible, and just before the doors slid shut, he heard a whisper, low and distorted, carried on a breath of freezing air. "You should not have stayed." The elevator door slammed shut behind John with a metallic crash that echoed far longer than it should have, and as the lights inside flickered weakly before settling into a dim, sickly glow, he leaned against the wall, gasping for air, his heart pounding so violently he thought it might burst from his chest. His hands trembled as he looked at the control panel, and that was when dread washed over him in a slow, suffocating wave. There were no familiar floor numbers, no lobby button, no emergency call option, only a single illuminated button marked -13, its red light pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "This isn't real," John whispered hoarsely, pressing himself into the corner of the elevator as if distance could protect him. But the moment his voice faded, the elevator began to move on its own, descending far faster than any normal system would allow. The air grew unbearably cold, frost creeping along the metal walls, and the sound of cables snapping taut above him mixed with a low, distant rumble that felt more like breathing than machinery. As the elevator plunged downward, memories flooded John's mind uninvited. His first day at Blackwood Tower, the warnings he'd laughed off, the way older employees avoided night shifts, the security guard who once told him, "If you hear typing when no one's there, leave immediately." The elevator jolted violently and came to a sudden stop, throwing John on the floor as the lights went out completely, plunging him into absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, broken only by his ragged breathing, John became acutely aware that he was no longer alone. A presence filled the space around him, heavy and oppressive, and he felt unseen eyes studying him with a cold, deliberate focus. Slowly, impossibly, the lights flickered back on, revealing that the elevator doors had opened, not to a basement or underground level, but to a vast, endless office floor stretching into darkness, rows upon rows of identical desks disappearing into the void. The air here was stale and frozen, and the faint sound of typing echoed endlessly, overlapping and distorted, as if thousands of people were working at once. Trembling, John stepped out of the elevator, and the doors closed behind him with a final, echoing thud, sealing his escape. The desks were occupied now, though none of the figures seated at them moved. They sat hunched over keyboards, faces obscured, bodies unnaturally still except for their fingers, which hammered relentlessly at the keys. John realized with growing horror that these figures were wearing outdated office attire, styles from different decades, and as he moved closer to one desk, he saw an ID badge clipped to a lifeless chest, the photo faded but still recognizable. A former Blackwood employee reported missing years ago. Panic surged through him as he stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, the sound reverberating like a gunshot, and in response, every typing sound stopped simultaneously. The silence was deafening. Slowly, all the heads turned toward him in perfect unison, revealing faces that were hollow and empty, as if erased, smooth skin stretched over bone with no eyes, no mouths, no features at all. John screamed and ran, his footsteps echoing uselessly as the office floor seemed to stretch endlessly. The desks rearranging themselves, hallways shifting and folding in on impossible angles. No matter which direction he ran, the tapping resumed behind him, faster now, angrier, accompanied by a low, droning whisper that repeated his name over and over again. The lights above flickered erratically, and with each flash, John saw flashes of the past. Employees collapsing at their desks, night shift workers vanishing into elevators, security footage glitching and erasing evidence, all absorbed by the building, all trapped in an endless loop of work that never ended. Exhausted and broken, John finally collapsed to his knees near a desk where a computer screen flickered to life, displaying a familiar login screen. His name was already typed into the username field. A message appeared beneath it, slow and deliberate. Position open. Shift accepted. John shook his head violently, tears freezing on his cheeks, whispering that he wanted to go home, that he would quit, that he would never come back, but the office did not listen. The screen changed one last time, showing the time 2:17 a.m., before resetting to 217 again and again and again, trapped in an endless loop. Somewhere far above, morning came to Chicago as usual, sunlight spilling over Blackwood Tower's windows, and employees arrived to find the office just as it always was, clean, quiet, and empty. Security later discovered John Miller's ID badge lying near the elevator on the main floor. Cold to the touch, the photo strangely blurred, as if his face had been slowly erased. Officially, John was listed as missing, another unexplained disappearance added to the building's long, sealed records. But those who still work night shifts know the truth, because sometimes, at exactly 2:17 a.m., they hear an extra keyboard typing just a little too close, and they glance at the security monitors long enough. They might see a new figure seated at a desk deep on floor -13, working tirelessly, waiting for the next employee who decides to stay late.